Ka waihui o mātou pānga whaiaro katoa ki te taha. Ka mihi mātou ki te koine me te inoi atu mo te ārhitanga I roto I o mātou whakaarorohanga. Kia mohi o ai kia whakaiti ai tā mātou whakahaere I ngā take o te hore nei. O te oranga, te maunga rongo me te aroha o Aotearoa.
Are published under the authority of the House. Select Committee reports have been delivered for presentation.
Report of the Finance and Expenditure Committee on the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's Financial Stability Report, May 2022. Report of the Justice Committee on the petition of Carl Thomas. Reports of the Regulations Review Committee on the complaint about the Resource Management National Environmental Standards for Freshwater Regulations 2020 and on the examination of COVID-19 orders presented between 16 and 29 March 2022.
The reports of the Finance and Expenditure Regulation Review Committees are set down for consideration. The Clerk has been informed of the introduction of bills.
Appropriation 2021-22 Supplementary Estimates Bill, Introduction. Repeal of Good Friday and Easter Sunday as restricted trading days, shop trading and sale of alcohol amendment bill, introduction. Electoral Strengthening Democracy Amendment bill, introduction. Increased penalties for breach of biosecurity bill, introduction.
Those bills are set down for first reading.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I present the supplementary estimates of appropriations for the Government of New Zealand for the year ending 30 June 2022.
That paper is published under the authority of the House. The House now comes to the delivery of the budget.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I present the 2022 budget speech, the Budget at a Glance 2022, the Wellbeing Budget 2022, including reports on the fiscal strategy on child poverty and the summary of initiatives, the Budget Economic and Fiscal Update 2022, and the estimates of appropriations for the Government of New Zealand for the year ending 30 June 2023.
Those papers are published under the authority of the House. Thank you. Congratulations. Don't spend it all at once.
We've got extras.
Henzo.
Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill, introduction.
The Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill is set down for first reading forthwith.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill be now read a first time.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill, first reading.
The Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill is now set down for second reading forthwith.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
I move that the Appropriation 2022-23 Estimates Bill be now read a second time. It is my great pleasure to present New Zealand's fourth Wellbeing Budget. In each of this government's three previous wellbeing budgets, we've not only considered the performance of our economy and finances, but also the wellbeing of our people, the health of our environment, and the strength of our communities. In Budget 2020 and 2021, we applied that wellbeing approach to dealing with COVID-19. This meant taking a health and science-led approach, focusing on caring for our people and our communities. It has meant that New Zealand has reached this stage of the pandemic in as good a position as any other country. Mr Speaker, that is not just because we have one of the lowest death rates from COVID, but also because our economy is in a stronger position than most. This has been recognised by 2 AAA credit ratings from leading ratings agencies and by the likes of the OECD and the IMF. It has been a tough couple of years for New Zealanders. I want to again thank businesses, workers and all members of our community for your hard work. It means we are now in a strong position to meet the next set of challenges and take the new opportunities to provide all New Zealanders with economic security in good times and in bad. The investments we are making in this budget build on the progress we made in Budget 2021 towards the government's 3 goals for this term. These are continuing to keep New Zealanders safe from COVID-19, accelerating the recovery and the rebuild from the impacts of COVID-19, and laying the foundations for the future, including addressing key issues such as climate change, housing affordability and child poverty. Budget 2022 invests $5.9 billion a year in net new operating spending, while introducing multi-year funding packages that also draw from Budget 2023 and Budget 2024 operating allowances. We're investing $2.9 billion from the Climate Emergency Response Fund to meet our emissions reduction plan and lay the foundations for a long-term transition to a low-emissions, high-wage economy. And, Mr Speaker, we are also supporting New Zealanders to meet the rising cost of living caused by global inflation pressures through a targeted package of support focusing on low and middle-income New Zealanders, including a short-term cost of living payment for around 2.1 million people. Mr Speaker, New Zealand's overall well-being has held up well during the COVID pandemic. Our mortality rate remains lower than those of our international peers, and life satisfaction remains high across all ethnicities. While the economic contraction associated with COVID-19 was much deeper and much more sudden than what New Zealand experienced during the global financial crisis, the economy has proved to be resilient, with economic activity in the December 2021 quarter 3.5% ahead of pre-pandemic levels. Unemployment at 3.2% is at record lows. Household incomes have continued to rise and balance sheets are strong across almost every sector. We have done this with some of the lowest debt in the world. Our net debt is forecast to be around 1/2 of Australia's, 1/4 of the UK's and 1/5 of the USA's using a comparable measure. As I've indicated, we are moving to a new debt indicator that is more in line with how other countries measure their net debt and more accurately reflects the government's fiscal position. On that indicator, net debt will now peak at 19.9% of GDP, or 41% using the old indicator, before reducing further over the forecast period. Economic growth is forecast to peak at 4.2% and average 2.1% across the forecast period. We're forecast to reach an operating balance before gains or losses, the Obergale surplus, in the 2024-25 financial year. This will be 5 years after COVID hit us and is a year earlier than the previous government returned to surplus after the global financial crisis. New fiscal rules will oblige the government to run a small surplus on average over time once we have returned to surplus and maintain net debt at a ceiling of below 30% of GDP. This approach means that current expenses will be met from current revenue. We will have a prudent level of debt that allows for a buffer against future shocks while providing room for high quality and much needed investment to close our infrastructure deficit. Mr Speaker, this balanced approach to fiscal policy is critical as we face the immediate challenges that are in front of us and as we address the long-term issues in our economy. The impacts of COVID-19 remain with us. Experiences of the pandemic differ greatly among New Zealanders, and its long-term effects have yet to be seen. Long-standing challenges around climate change, child poverty, productivity, and housing quality and affordability have not lost their urgency. On top of that, Budget 2022 has been delivered in a difficult time for the global economy and for many New Zealanders. The impacts of rising inflation due to COVID, supply chain challenges and pressure on oil prices from the Russian invasion of Ukraine are being felt at the petrol pump and at the supermarket. This budget responds to these immediate challenges facing New Zealanders while also looking ahead. The here and now matters, but so too does tomorrow, and making sure that we provide for a secure future. This budget is about both, a careful balance to provide economic security into the future and make sure we invest for what is needed now without adding to the drivers of inflation. Mr. Speaker, I'll talk more about our long-term initiatives shortly, but first I want to focus on our immediate challenges. I am acutely aware of the cost of living pressures that exist for many people, particularly those on low and middle incomes. While the current levels of inflation are expected to be temporary, this doesn't take away from the impact it is having on households and businesses. New Zealanders are not alone in feeling these pressures. Recently, the US has recorded inflation of 8.5%, Canada 6.7%, Germany 7.3%, and as of last night, the UK 9%. The very latest OECD average was an inflation of 8.8% in March, putting New Zealand about the middle of the pack. Such international comparisons, however, do not diminish the impact on New Zealanders who are currently struggling to deal with rising costs. Mr. Speaker, the government throughout COVID has supported households and businesses. More than $20 billion was provided in across-the-board support from the wage subsidy scheme, resurgent support and COVID support payments. This has kept many people in work. 62% of all jobs were supported in 2020 by the wage subsidy scheme and 47% in 2021. In response to the rapid spike in global oil prices following the war in Ukraine, we moved quickly in March to reduce the fuel excise by 25 cents a litre. For a family that fills up an average car every week, that represents up to $17 per tank or more than $220 worth of support over the 3 months. Road user charges were similarly reduced and public transport prices halved for the same period. These measures were on top of changes that we made to increase income support for low and middle income families from 1 April this year, including a third lift in weekly main benefit rates following those in 2020 and 2021. The changes that we have made since coming into government mean that 364,000 people who receive income support are better off by an average of $109 per week. For those with children, they are better off by an average of $175 per week. As we move through these next few months,